Welcome back to B.HookedCrochet.com. I'm your host Brittany, and I have something very fun for us to try. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to crochet using only our fingers. So we're going to place the hooks aside for just a little bit, and we're going to crochet a cowl using a super bulky yarn and only our fingers. For this tutorial, you're going to need either 1 or 2 skeins of Lion brand quickie yarn. Now that depends on whether you're making the child size or the adult size. For this video, I'm going to be demonstrating the children's size, so I will be using 1 skein of this Lion brand quickie yarn, and I'll be using the colorway Tangy. If you're a crocheter, you'll find that this is going to come very natural to you. So we're basically doing the exact same things that we do when we crochet, only we're using our fingers as the hook. So the first thing that we need to do is create a slip knot. And we're going to do that just in the same way that we normally would. And then we're just going to place that loop on our index finger. Now for the chain process, you want to make your loops pretty large, and that's because by using your fingers, the stitches are a little bit bigger. And if you chain too tightly here at the bottom, then it's going to make your cowl a little uneven down at the bottom. So leave yourself a little bit of space. Hold the working yarn in your other hand, and you just want to grab that strand, however is natural to you. Now you can actually hook it with your finger, or you can stick your thumb right on through, and then just pull a strand through that loop. Now I tend to find that it's a little easier to use my index finger and thumb, so I just continue in this fashion. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, we are going to be doing the child size cowl for this video, and so I want to chain 12 times. So I want 12 chains. If you're doing the adult size, you want to follow along with the written instructions, and you can find that pattern at BHookedCrochet.com. Once you have made the proper number of chains based on the size that you're working with, it's time to now join this to form a ring. And so we want to just grab the very first chain that we created, and we're just going to put that right up next to our finger, and we want to make our chain a little bit wider, so we're just going to put our finger into that chain, and now I'm going to grab the working yarn again, and I'm just simply going to pull the working yarn through both of the loops that were on my finger. And so what we've done there is made a slip stitch in order to create this ring. Now I will be honest, this first round where we're going to be working into each one of these chains is going to be the most difficult. It's a little bit trickier to visualize the chains to know exactly which loop to work into, so it takes a little bit of practice. At this point, we've got our loop there on our finger and our working yarn, and what we want to do is make a single crochet into every one of these chains. And so I like to just make sure my chain is not twisted in any way, and then I like to visualize these top loops here, and those are the loops that I'm going to work my stitches into. So this loop right here is actually coming from the last chain, so I'm going to skip that because we've slip stitched there, and what we're going to do now is make a chain 1, and that's going to count as a single crochet. It's also going to get us up a little bit higher to accommodate for the height of the stitch. So I've located the very next chain that I want to start working into, and I'm just going to insert my finger into that chain, and I want to grab some of the working yarn and pull up a loop on my finger. And now I'm just going to slip my thumb into those loops so I can grab the working yarn again, and then just slide those 2 loops off of my finger and catch that loop from the working yarn. Locating the very next chain available to work into, just insert my finger, grab that working yarn, and then we're just going to pull the working yarn through those 2 loops. And we just want to repeat that for each one of our chains. Now you want to double check the count of your stitches at the very end of this round, and we'll go over that in a little bit more detail coming up. Once you've made it all the way around your chain and you verify that you have the correct number of stitches, we want to find that chain 1 that we created at the very beginning of this round. And you can see I've got it right here on my finger. And for this particular pattern, we're not going to be joining with a slip stitch, and if you're familiar with crochet, you'll know what that means. We're going to work in a spiral, so I'm going to stick my finger into that chain 1, which we've counted as a stitch, and I'm just going to single crochet. So I'm doing the exact same thing that I was doing before, and I'm just going to continue. I locate the next stitch. Now, sometimes it's easy to locate the stitches by looking at the top of the work, because you've got the V here, or sometimes you can just kind of look for the hole that you see there. So there's a stitch, and you pull that apart and there's a little hole there, so you know that's the next stitch. So some visual cues for you to help see the stitches. Now, this particular yarn that I'm working with makes it a little bit more tricky to see the stitches, and so you sometimes need all the help you can get. But for the most part, this is a really forgiving pattern, so if you make any kind of mistake, it's not really going to be easily seen. So from this point on, it's pretty smooth sailing. We're always going to have a stitch to work into since we're working in this spiral fashion, and we're basically just going to keep single crocheting like this until we run out of yarn. Now, the particular yarn that I'm using, there are 22 yards to a skein, so I'm just going to crochet until I have reached the end of my 22 yards. And we want to leave a little bit of room at the bottom of the skein because we do need to add a couple of finishing touches, so you want to keep that in mind. Leave yourself about 2 feet or so of yarn left over. And so at this point you can pause your video, finish crocheting until you've almost reached the end of your skein, and we'll meet back up and we'll discuss how to finish our cowls. So I have now made it basically to the end of the skein of yarn that I was working with. If you're using a different brand of yarn and you're looking for a little bit more of an exact measurement of when to stop, my cowl now measures about 5.5 inches wide, so that's something that you can use to go along with. So at this point, since we've been working in a spiral fashion, we have our last stitch here, and if we were just to finish things off, it's going to be quite uneven, as you can see. So generally what we do in crochet to work our stitches down a little bit is slip stitch. So we want to insert our finger into the next stitch, pull a loop through the stitch, and then now take that same loop and pull it through the loop that was on your finger. And we're just going to do that one more time in the next stitch. And that's going to finish off our cowl. Now what we'll do now is just take this last little bit of yarn, pull that through the loop that was just on our finger, and that's how we're going to bind off. Now we don't want to just cut this yarn the way it is here, so we're going to hide it within our work, as well as the tail from the beginning of our project. What you'll want to do is turn your cowl inside out, and then we're simply just going to work this tail underneath some of the stitches. Now there's no right or wrong way to do it. We just want the end result to be the same, to hide this tail within the stitches, and we want to work it under enough so that it doesn't work its way back out. So I'm just grabbing a couple loops from each of the stitches and just feeding the tail right on through. Once you're satisfied that the tail is woven in, we're just going to trim off the extra little bit of yarn, and then we'll just repeat the same step for our other tail from the start of the project. This concludes our tutorial on how to finger crochet. I hope you've had a lot of fun with this little project, and stay tuned at BHookedCrochet.com for even more free patterns and video tutorials.